Hello everyone, this video is about creating a database container with persistent data. So in this example I'm going to use the Mysql container from Docker Hub and of course Docker. And so what am I doing here? So containers were intended to be stateless. So in order to maintain any kind of state in any system, we have to use secondary storage somewhere. So you can maintain state in memory, but then when the system goes down, that state is lost. So it depends on your system. But in general, you have to have some kind of secondary storage. So in practice, when we deploy these systems, these containers, storage and databases will be on separate servers or through cloud hosting services. So things like AWS, EBS, Elastic Block Storage, S3, RDS, something like that. So, but it will be elsewhere. But also in practice, when we're developing and testing, we don't want to use those expensive services. So what we do is we map storage to the host systems. That's what I'm going to show you now. So I'm going to do this with Docker-compose. So the reason I'm doing that is because when you run a container built from a Docker file that requires what we're going to do, the volume mapping, you need to use a -v or a -mount option. So it's more dynamic and you have to remember to do that every time you run it. So you could create a script, but the other way that you do that is to put the volume commands into Docker-compose. So Docker-compose has to be installed beforehand. It's not installed with Docker, it's a separate install. I'll put a link in the explanation below. So we're going to map using Docker-compose. So the default file for Docker-compose is the docker-compose.yaml. And YAML stands for yet another markup language. So it does the same thing. It sits on top of Dockerfile, and I've described it before. So here's the version, which is optional. And in this case, I only have one image. So I'm not creating a multi-container image. A multi-image container, I'm using one image, and it's called petsdb. So the default is what I'm going to do is pull the Mysql, the latest version of Mysql, and I found a bug in Windows and I had to add this command. So when you have a command, so this is the default image up here. Oops, sorry. And when you have a command, that is passed the default startup script for the container. So that will help with this bug, and you can check it out if you want. It's not really important for this video. And here are some environment variables that I'm passing to it. So the way Mysql works, and it's all described here in Docker Hub, is there are certain environment variables that we can use to set up our database. So they will be used when I run my database to create a database for me. So the ones that I'm using are MySQL database. So my database will be named pets. There's a user that will be associated with the database with grant all, pet user, and the password for that is secret. And then the only one that we absolutely have to set up is the MySQL root password. That one has to be there. So below that, I have volumes. And this is what's important for keeping the, for mapping the data, for keeping persistent data. So containers are intended to be stateless, as I said here. And what we're doing is we're going to map from the container to the host that we're running on. So here on the right hand side we have the container directory, so there won't actually be, and of course this is in memory, so that will be mapped to the physical disk at this directory on my host. And the same thing here, so we have the Docker entry point, which is kind of special, and we have the testdb. So this is where MySQL puts the database. So the database will actually be written to testdb on my host, and I'm going to talk about this just now. Docker entry point will be mapped to dbscript. What happens with Docker entry point is anything that I put in here, so I can copy things over here if I want to, but in this case I'm mapping. Anything that's in dbscript that has a .sql extension or a .sh extension or a .sql.gz will be executed in alphabetical order. And so what we do is we put here a script to create and populate, if needed, a database. So we'll create the whole structure and populate it. So now I'm going to show you my script. So before I show you my script, I just wanted to point out the ports. So this is port mapping or port forwarding from the container on the right hand side to the host on the left hand side. So we're using the same port inside the container and external, which is the default MySQL port. So here we have DB script and test DB. So if we look at DB script, there's a SQL file there, and this SQL script will be executed on startup. So I'm creating a database. It's already created in the container. So what I want to do is use it, create a table, populate that table, create another table, populate the table. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a database of my pets. So that's being mapped here. This DB script is being mapped. And the other one is the database. So that's where my actual physical database is going to go. So here I've done a directory listing, and as you can see, there is no testdb directory. So what happens is if it doesn't exist, it will create it for me, and that's fine. That's what I want. I want it to create a new directory and a new file system when I start up. So now I'm going to launch this. So for Docker Compose, I have to do Docker Compose up to bring up my container. So here what we're seeing is, since I didn't put it in the background, we're actually seeing the log file from my petsdb. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit Control-C, and I killed that. So now it's stopped, but what happened when I started up was it used that DB script here to create a database. So here it created my testdb, and if I have a look at, so there's all of my database is in here. So this is the database structure that's set up by MySQL. And there's my, well, I don't have the permissions in here. I'm not allowed to look at all of it. So because it was created by the Docker daemon or the Docker proxy. So as you can see here, the ownership is a little bizarre, but it's created by the Docker daemon. So it can be read by the Docker daemon. So that's fine. But now I want to access the database. So it's already created, so when I start up again, it won't create it, but it'll read it from there. So now I'm going to do Docker compose up, but I want to put it in the background. I want it to be run as a daemon. I don't want to see the log on the screen. So here we go. So now it's running. So notice what it did when it runs my container. What it does is it uses the local directory that it's in. It emits the dots, and it uses the name of the service that I set up, and this is the first instance of it. So let's see what's going on here. So here we see that Docker proxy is listening on 3306, so that's good. And we can also see the container running. So here we have populate petsdb, and I have the mapping from any IP address to the container. So there's my running container. So now, if I want to, since this is a running container, I can always use docker exec interactively. What did I call it? Populate db to run the bash script shell. So now I'm actually in there, so I can have a look, see what's running. Sorry, top isn't available there, but and ps isn't available there. But here, what I'm actually inside the container, so I'm not going to exit that. So I don't need to do that. So while it's running, I can exe and go into it using bash. And there's no MySQL client installed on there. So when I go in, I can also use docker top. So it shows me what processes are running. Notice I can also use docker logs and see the logs. So I don't need to have the logs on the screen. I can see them anytime I want to. So now let's access the database. So to access the database, I have MySQL client installed on my host system, on my VM. It's not installed in the container. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use MySQL client to access the container. So here, this is how I access it. I have to use localhost because that's where I'm coming from. It's going to prompt me for the password. I'm using the user root. I'm being a bit lazy. I should use that secret user. But so okay, so the password for root is, I got in. So now I'm actually, this MySQL is talking to this MySQL client is actually talking to the daemon on the container. So now I'm going to use my database. Well, let's do show databases so that you can see my pets database is there, and I'm going to use it. So now I'm using pets. I can I'm going to manipulate the data. So let's do select asterisk from fish. So as you can see, I have some piranha and I have some zebrafish. I misspelled zebrafish. But the piranha were chasing each other and they gobbled, three of them gobbled two. So I want to update the number of piranha. I want to go down by two. So what I'm going to do is update that row. So oops. Oops, I didn't change my quantity, sorry. So it changed it. Okay, that's good. And the other thing that happened to my pets was I got a new puppy. It's always good news when you get a new puppy, so I want to insert a new puppy. So what I'm going to do is insert into dogs. Values, let's call him Sweetums. He's a mutt. And he was born on 2020, 10. I'm making this up. Would be nice to have a new puppy though. So that's what I'm doing. I'm insert. Okay, so one row affected. So let's have a look at what we've got there. Not very good at typing, as you can see. So there we go. Oops, sorry, it's not fish I want, it's dogs. So fish have been updated and dogs has been updated. I've got that new mutt. So now that I'm finished, I'm going to exit the client. And my database will have been changed and it's in permanent storage. So now when I stop this container, so now when I stop this container and then run it again, I'll still have those database entries. So now this will be the third time I'm running it. Let's go. Bring it up. And of course, the only time that the script is run is if there's no data in my database. So if there's nothing there's nothing in the database that's mapped. So if there's nothing here, varlive MySQL, then it will create a new. It will run my script. But since I have something there, it's not going to run my script. So now it's up. So now let's contact the database again to make sure that I still have the same data. Why am I doing this? So now I'm in again. So let's use the database. Oops, not ampersand, asterisk. And there you see I have maintained that data and select asterisk from dogs. I've maintained my new mutt. So that's so that's maintaining state and maintaining the state of the database. So no matter how many times I start and stop this database, provided I started in this directory and I have that mapping, it will always reread the database. So this is how we maintain state. So the container itself doesn't have state. It maps to the host file system to give us permanent storage. Now, of course, this mapping to the host is only good for testing, really. Wherever we run this container, we can map to the host and maintain that data. But when we deploy, we're going to map to, as I said, either a database service in the cloud, or maybe we actually have a server running. So maybe we won't map. We'll just change, instead of using this database, we'll use another service running in the cloud or running somewhere else. But this is a way that we can, with testing, keep our data and run it from a container and do it very simply. So we didn't have to install any XAMPP or anything. All we had to do was use this docker compose and the script to set up our database. So hopefully this is helpful.